that car parked for the next house is just packed in there.
Last thing he needs another cup of coffee. It smells like that.
I need I shoveled all day today.
Who didn't?
Mine was harder. It was uphill. No.
Wilson shoveled all day.
All I had to do is the deck and part of the boat.
Do you have
I did my
power
whole
on that?
driveway. I
Mike?
have one of the B&B, one of the Board of Fish people is staying.
And you guys know how those work?
Dave does.
Push and hold to turn it on.
The red
The
button.
red button.
And I do believe this has
How long do you have to hold
surround,
it?
just until you see the
If,
light. So this should pick up
Sync.
plenty.
Does it, and then do I have to push something or is it on?
it should be on.
Well, tap it.
Turn RF mute off? So how do
Yeah.
you say yes to this button? So I
They're
think my
on.
mute is on. It says RF mute. Turn RF mute off. So my four-wheel drive goes out in my truck. Of course, I get home from Hawaii and it's just a giant
Mimi
dome of
still
snow. So I get a new vacuum pump, dig the thing out, put some chains on the back tires, get it down to my dad's shop, put a new vacuum pump in there. Four-wheel drive's still off. When I had my transmission rebuilt a few years ago, when they take the transmission off and take the transfer case off, and when they put the transfer case off, it unplugged the air system. So I replaced that thing for nothing. I was trying to figure out how to open up the hood and I see my vacuum and unplugged.
Should be okay.
Been there, done that.
I don't know. I'd watch out for her doing that.
In the eyeball. Let's just practice.
It's just gonna be us.
Yeah, and Allison's online. You got weather down. You got the
And
tap.
Jeff Guard should be.
Jeff Carr.
He's in Yakata. Did he stop?
Is that where the plane stopped?
Dave Allison, are you in
I wonder if that's
Yakutat?
Louise got stuck.
I don't know.
Roger.
Wow, how did that happen?
Where are you staying in Yakata?
The Situk Lodge or something like that.
Okay.
I think there's only one
We
place.
landed in Yakutat and the weather in Cordova was marginal, so they held us for a little bit. And in the meantime, the weather machine in Yakutat broke. And without a accurate weather report, both the departing station and the arriving station can't take off with people, so they dumped us, took off after 4 hours, and left us here.
Oh, you're kidding. So the plane went without people. So I guess that won't be
It's
hard.
thoughtful. Ready to forming a swing?
So yeah, we're having a party here at the lodge in Yakutat.
I'll bet you are. Okie doke. I'll call the city council work session of December 1st, 2021 to order at 6 p.m. Roll call, please.
Mayor Copeland,
Here?
Tom Baylor,
Here.
Kathy Sherman,
Here.
Jeff Guard,
Here.
Melina Meyer,
Here.
Ann Schaefer,
Here.
David Allison,
Here.
and David Gleason.
Here.
That is everyone.
Okay, tonight's work session topic is the Cordova fiscal year 2022 budget discussion, and I will pass the mic to Manager Howard.
Thank you. So in front of you in your packet is a budget, a balanced budget that is loaded with everything that we discussed at the prior work session. We locked in the revenue side of things, and then I went back and assigned values to those things that department heads had requested specifically to help them do their jobs. So you heard from Paul with the fire department that there was a need for an additional EMT support. We had 2 contracted positions plus 1 full-time position that were added to the budget. Parks and Rec gave some rationale behind adding to their budget in order for them to provide the services that the community wants. We added other staff positions within the Public Works Department, and we budgeted for an increase in the wage scale for all employees, with the understanding that right now we're in the midst of union negotiations and we don't yet have any confirmed contract numbers. So I wanted to go through this document a bit, answer any questions certainly, but probably most important for me is to really make sure that you all have a comfort level with the revenue side of things. On the revenue side, we did budget for a $300,000 draw from the permanent fund earnings, not the corpus, but the earnings. We allocated 50% of the ARPA distribution that the state has allotted us. We're allowed 2 years to expend those funds, so we would budget 50% next year and 50% the following year. And then we did include the rate increases that council previously approved of 5% for water, sewer, and refuse. I want to speak a little bit about the ARPA funds because those are one-time dollars, right? We do have to expend it on city operations. You can't park it in the bank. And because they're one-time funds, the question is do we build or increase the overall budget size of our city, understanding that in 3 years, those ARPA funds will cease to exist. I presented this budget with some degree of optimism that we can find revenues. We have the time to find revenues to replace those ARPA funds in 2024. But that is a gamble, and it's something that we all have to decide we're comfortable with. So in building this budget, it does take into account those ARPA funds as a finger in the dike way to get us to a place where we can add staff and increase our services to the community. But you need to understand that in 2004, those resources won't be available. And we'll have to decide what our confidence level is that we can keep those budget numbers up, or allow us to grow for 2 years and then retreat. So those are kind of sticky wicket questions that probably warrant some discussion on your behalf. And with that, I will entertain whatever discussion questions you all have. Thank you.
Okay.
There you go.
So, Councilman Gleason.
Can I ask a question about the expenses? Or are we not there? Okay, so that $500,000 to CCMC has caught my eye. What's that?
So last year we budgeted initially $600,000 for CCMC. We did approve a budget at $300,000. They asked that we put that number in. I think this is one of those wiggle room numbers, but they have some work that needs to be done to their building, city-owned building, obviously, that grant funds that they currently have access to do not cover. So last year they used all of our money for removal of the bulk, the fuel storage tank that was leaking. They aren't using it for operations. It's strictly being used for capital improvements that are required to maintain their hospital certification and or the building compliance with state requirements.
What happens to it if they don't use it this year? I'm just wondering how come we don't just like take it out of the permanent fund when they would need it?
We can certainly do that. I put it in the operating budget because we have always had an operating number in there for CCNC. It's ranged from 300 to 600,000. We plugged a number in of 500,000 because that was a number that would cover the cost of the specific work that they requested. The source of those funds could be operating dollars or some other type of money, again, at your discretion.
Yeah, it goes in there, but I don't think anybody likes that. We would love them to be self-sustaining.
Yeah, I will say, and Dr. Sanders will be here for the meeting, the regular meeting, but these resources are not operating dollars, so they are self-sustaining in terms of revenue and expenses to keep themselves functional on the operational level. These are specific dollars requested to basically provide for a building that is needing help.
So they're in the black and PERS is up to date. Okay.
Councilman Ellison or Baylor? Questions?
Guard and fire too are on there.
Yeah, this is Alice.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, that was my initial question too, was on the hospital thing there. When do we see their budget? I think they're supposed to, by code, present us a budget at some point in time, but I think that was before we're to do ours. But you say they requested 500,000, but I haven't seen any request.
That was done through budget discussion I had directly with staff. They hope to present their budget to us at the next meeting, which is of course after our meeting. But, and again, Dr. Sanders will be online at the 7 o'clock meeting, and you can ask any specific questions around that. But again, the number in this budget is a capital expense line. It is not to be used for general operations.
Okay, Meyer or Guard, any questions?
This is Baylor.
Councilman Baylor.
Yeah, I guess my concern is the $300,000 out of the earnings of the permanent fund, and I believe there's some other monies in there from the CARES Act or something like that. So we're creating a budget that we really can't afford. I mean, it's not sustainable to be pulling $300,000 a year out of your permanent fund to balance the budget. So, yeah, here we are. It's a little disheartening too. We've been talking for 2 years about doing an RFP and having discussion with investment committee and other things, and that seems, whatever reason, staff doesn't want to do that. So I'm a little concerned about creating this budget more than what we can afford and pulling money out of the permanent fund, and then we got some of those, like I said, I think it's CARES Act or something like that, and there's $600,000 there that's going to go away. So what do we do in the future? So that's my comment.
Manager Howard.
So to address your concerns, I would like to just say that I just want to be really clear that this is the earnings, the investment earnings. By code, we are allowed to draw from the investment earnings from the permanent fund for general operations. And I just want to make sure everyone understands that it is not rating the corpus at all. It is taking some number from the amount of money in the investment earnings. I know we've all talked about, well, what number should that be? Should we be reinvesting those earnings into the corpus? And that is a conversation that has not yet happened. And I promise you, Tom, there's no resistance whatsoever to having an investment committee and certainly having a conversation around investments. It's really been a matter of bandwidth. So there was a memo earlier that I shared with you from reaching out to some investment professionals around how we manage things. And there was a recommendation made that what we're doing is perfectly within the scope of what would be expected of a government entity. And so I didn't prioritize that, but I will make sure that that becomes top of my agenda for 2022 January, so we can get that going.
So a response for that, please.
Yes, Councilman Baylor.
Yeah, well, nobody's questioned our ability if you take the money out of the earnings. I understand that, but I'm questioning the wisdom of it. Is it sustainable? And of course, taking $300,000 a year out of it is not sustainable. And that's where you would get your advice from your broker or whoever's handling their funds to kind of give you a better understanding of that. Council needs to understand that. But if you're going to think you're going to be pulling $300,000 a year out of that every year to balance your budget, it's going to go away. So that's my concern.
Okay, and council, I heard it sounded like a couple of you were dropping back off and back on. And on the front end, the manager said that yes, there's a gap there, but there also are a couple of years to increase revenues and try to intersect with that point when those funds in the earnings use decline.
What does increased revenues mean? Does that mean higher taxes? Or where are you going to increase the revenues from?
Yeah, taxes, property taxes. Another way to say that, another just general thing is we have balanced revenues and expenses. So if we want to reduce the revenues from somewhere, council's going to have to decide where to reduce the expenses side. So, or the manager is. So.
As I said at the very beginning, what I'd like
I'm
to
not
just...
saying I'm going to vote against this budget. I'm not saying I'm going to vote for it, but I think I want everybody to understand we're setting up a budget that we cannot afford, and so we're going to have to bring in other revenues, and the only way we have to bring in other revenues is taxation. So those are going to be some hard discussions on who do you tax once again. Usually it falls back to the property owners, which we all know that's like, 46% of the people, of the property owners that pay. So those are my concerns. We keep bumping up and hiring more people and giving more to the school, and can we afford it? Yeah, we can do it this year. We can pull some money out of the permanent fund earnings, but it's not sustainable. So I'm looking a year or 2 years down the line here.
Okay.
I totally agree with you, Tom. I think the reality is that we're at a kind of critical point right now where we through the disaster of COVID, we have an opportunity we've received some funding that we would not normally have. We would not normally be
Could I
having
interrupt you
this
just, I'm sorry, Helen. Everybody's coming in clear, but perhaps you're not close to the mic because for me anyway, it fades in and out.
Okay.
Maybe they don't.
I wonder if it's talking to that mic. That's
Okay, sorry, you're not on that one, sure. What I was gonna say is I totally agree with you, Tom. And as you may not have heard when I prefaced this conversation today, is I loaded the budget with all the revenue that we discussed at the last work session, and sort of locked that, and then identified needs that were recommended by department heads and others, and built a budget around that. Now, at this moment in time, if we're uncomfortable with the revenue numbers at all, what I'd like to do is focus there and say, okay, well, these maybe are ambitious, or we're not comfortable expending these resources or whatever. Then I go back to the expense side, and I have things that were not in last year's budget that we could look at as cuts. And I just need direction. And again, if we're uncomfortable on the revenue side, I would love to have that conversation and have you council identify those areas that you feel like, oh, this might be a little more than we want to spend, or that we feel might be coming in. But again, I took all the numbers that were recommended at the last council meeting and plugged those into this document. And it's totally open for your modification.
hey,
Thank
Councilman.
you. We can hear you much better now. I'll yield to the rest of the group.
Can you hear me, Councilman Baylor?
Yes, everybody was coming in except for the city manager, and Malcolm's
Okay.
coming in good.
Yeah, she's got a good mic that we can hear in the room, but I think might be talking to the speakerphone in the middle here. So, Councilman Sherman?
Sure, is there no one else online? Who wants to go?
Go ahead and I'll ask
Okay.
online again. Yeah.
So I have a couple of different notes, and I know Helen specifically wanted to know about revenue side. So I just wanted to ask, when is raw fish tax revenue supposed to come in?
Any day,
Okay,
yeah.
okay, easy
And
question.
we do have a real number for raw fish tax from last year. It was around 782,000 or something like that.
Okay. Also on page 27, the Cordova Center revenue actual year-to-date. I know we had not met our goal for our budgeted number of 15,000 for that, but I just wanted to bring this to the attention of the city council. I think we're still awaiting payment from Electrify Alaska and Board of Fish, so that should bring us up and possibly over that budgeted amount. So I just wanted to make sure everybody saw that Cordova Center is bringing in money. I wanted to thank you for the breakout of the library and museum salaries under expenditures, because that has been a bone of contention for me for years. And it's very necessary when you go to apply for grants. And I still, in terms of the revenue side, I have nothing else. I think you've done everything that we asked for, but I still would like to see the Cordova Center broken out as an enterprise fund, not intermingled with all the general funds accounts. I think it needs to be on its own, and I really would like to see that in this year's budget, because I think we can prove that we earn enough through the Cordova Center rentals that we could afford a part-time person for event coordinator, which is what we need to do, because Mimi and I, who have both were serving as event coordinators, Mimi has been here since 7 o'clock this morning. She has not left the building yet. She's going to retire in December of 2022. And I think this is essential for us to show the community, based on the business plan that we've developed for the Cordova Center, that it can stand on its it can stand alone, and it can bring in the amount of money we need to operate and fund it and maintain it. So I would really, really like to see this broken out and taken out of general fund. I think it needs to show that it's earning its keep. So I hope that can happen before the next budget cycle.
I could do it this time around if the will of the council is to create its own enterprise fund. And I just look for council
Okay.
direction.
So Mayor Copeland, I guess I would ask that you look for consensus from council.
Okay, now?
Yeah, why not?
Councilman Schaefer.
Is there like capacity to create that? In
It's
terms of, it's there, it's just a matter of breaking it out?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's not hard to do. I don't know that I know all the expense side has been rolled into the museum operations.
I could do it for you.
Yeah, and I'm sure that it can be done. Yeah, okay.
Okay.
So I just have one
Councilman
question.
Gleason.
So the only change is, instead of that money going into the general fund, it couldn't go into the general fund.
It would be in its own fund, and the expenses that are embedded into the museum Cordova Center budget right now would be removed from the expense side and put into that as well.
Because I'm looking at the different years, and they're wildly, of course, 2020 was really small, I'm sure due to COVID, but they're different. They go,
Yeah, and I think
I mean, there'd have to
2021,
be some real effort at getting people here for stuff, for that to work.
yeah, so.
It's not gonna be hard. But we need to find someone who can be an event coordinator.
No, I
make
agree,
it successful.
short-staffed, for sure.
Yes. So, and then, may I have another?
Yeah.
Okay. I just had one more comment and concern. And I feel strongly about this. People keep saying we're hiring new people, but we're not. We're filling vacant positions. We are filling vacant positions that were cut in 2016, 2017, and we have all been seeing the results of that in Parks and Rec, well, I see it in the museum. And so we're not putting new city positions in, we're filling old positions. We don't have a human resources director, we don't have a finance director, we have 2 people in the museum, we have 3 people in Parks and Rec. We are not building new positions, we're trying to rebuild so that we can offer the services to our community that our community wants. I'm done now.
Okay, so council, I'd ask for consensus on the manager setting up an enterprise fund. And I'll use that term loosely, there may be a better structure, but the idea is to capture the revenues from the Cordova Center so that they can fund the services of the Cordova Center. Is there any objection? Okay.
We legally take action like that in a workshop session?
That's a question mark I'm asking myself. And,
We're not taking
Just giving her
action.
direction.
yeah, you're giving direction to the manager, and she'll map it out and answer that question for you. It's a good question, Councilman Gard. Did you have other budget questions or comments, Councilman Gard?
Yeah, my concerns are pretty well what Councilman Baylor's are, and I understand the concept and argument about we're not creating new positions, we're just filling ones that are vacant. I understand that to a certain extent. But at some time we need to sit down and have a discussion about what we can afford as a community and what we want to have for services. That may be higher than what we're getting now, may be lower than what we're getting now. But we keep just doing one side of this at a time. Either the revenue side or the services side, and we haven't had the whole conversation together on this as a community to figure out what we want and what we're willing to pay for. So I have real problems with the $12 million budget with where we are with revenue these days, because a bunch of what we've got is evaporating.
Manager Howard?
So that's my 2 cents.
I also want to identify that I spent a lot of time looking at the strategic plan that was developed 2 years ago, I think, published right when I started work, and that became a driving document as the community driver for this budget too. There was a lot of priorities that were established through community input in the plan.
I'm having a hard time hearing.
Okay, I'm sorry, I keep talking into the mic. I was just saying that a lot of the priorities that are reflected in this budget were the result of the strategic plan that was published 2 years ago through the work of Agnew Beck. So I used the community feedback and the responses that were embedded in that plan to kind of drive some of these priorities, including Parks and Rec, public safety, those sorts of things. So I want to be clear that the departments weren't driving that agenda, it's the strategic plan.
No, I understand, but like I said, a one-sided deal, because if you ask anybody what they want for Christmas, it's going to be this big long list of stuff. It doesn't necessarily mean that that somebody's willing to pay for all that. And we need to have both sides of this conversation together at a time. Not only what do we want, but how do we pay for it? Are we willing to pay for what we want? So I know that you just didn't make these things up. But we've only been having one side of the conversation at a time. We haven't sat down and talked about the whole thing as a community. We've talked about what we want, and now we need to talk about what we want and the dollars for it. Anyway, thank you.
Okay, further questions or comments? Councilman Meyer?
Yeah, Councilman Baylor.
Councilman, let me check with Councilman Meyer real quick. Did you have any comments, Councilman Meyer?
have no real additional comments to make. I like the idea of separating out the Cordova Center revenue and expenses on its own, whether that's enterprise fund or however that's done. Just a really detailed way to separate it out, I think, would be really helpful. I also agree with the comment that it's hard passing a budget with $300,000 coming out of the permanent fund. While I do understand those are earnings and appreciate that, I would like to have that for more capital projects or things that come up. But I'm not also against using it for this year's budget. So I don't have anything else to add. Thanks.
Okay, Councilman Baylor.
Yeah, thank you. I guess I would add on to Councilman Guard's comments, and that's where I was going. We understand we didn't pull these services and these hiring out of the air. It's what the community wants, but as they proved their point when they turned down the gas tax overwhelmingly, they're not willing to pay for it. So, again, going back to Councilman Guard's comments, we were having this conversation, well, this is what everybody wants. We also have to have the conversation of, and this is how we're going to pay for it. And right now, we're pulling it out of the earnings. And as I said earlier, we can't continue to do that. So we need to have that honest conversation. All right, City of Cordova, we can get by this year. We've got some grant money, we've got some earnings, but next year you're going to have to pay the piper, and this is where it's going to come from. And if we could have those discussions, I'd feel a lot better about voting for this budget at the excess that it is. But without that, I'm uncomfortable with it because I want to know where the money's going to come from, and I think the community needs to support that part of it before we continue on.
This is Councilmember Meyer.
Councilman Meyer.
Kind of a question maybe for the clerk. I don't know if you know offhand, but can City Council try to do the gas tax again, or what? Because I know there's a time limit of how many years, but I think it's been a few years now. And then
I think it was 2 years.
Because last time City Council didn't spend any money on education or really talk to the public about it, and I really think that tax got taken out because there just wasn't a lot of information on there. A lot of the community isn't going to sit around and listen to all of council meetings to really know the ins and outs of why something is done. So I think if we were to do it again, whenever we can, it would be really important to explain why, or any kind of tax for that matter, but specifically I'm just curious the time limit on that one.
I don't know the exact, I don't remember even what year it was. What year was it?
It wasn't very long ago. 4 years, 3 years.
3 or 4 years ago, and I remember a 2-year cutoff.
It's one thing
Sounds
to have a
right.
gas tax when it's $2 a gallon. It's another thing when it's $4.50 a gallon.
Well,
It's already
it wasn't, we were doing it as cents
It
per
was
gallon.
cents. So it ended up being like, actually, the higher the price is, the less percentage of the tax is.
Oh, okay.
Right, it was based on gallons,
Still,
not
when the price
price.
of fuel is as high as it is, I seriously doubt people are going to want to pay anything more. I know I don't.
Would you mind if I interject something, Council? So, some of these revenues are going to go up anyway. Sales tax is on goods and services and commodities, and we have inflation happening. So groceries, hotels, lodging, those things are all going up, and fuel, electric rates. So sales tax revenues are going to go up with those. And we've got $50 to $100 million of economic activity, construction activity in this town that we know about over the next 3 years, and likely more to come. So there's, as Councilman Sherman alluded to, we've had 2 events here in the last 4 months. There's Cordova Center revenues, but that's the tiny part. The other part is hotels, rental cars. We had them sold out again this week, and that generates the 6% sales tax and the accommodations tax. So those are some of the places revenues can come from. Uncruise is talking about moving back in. We've got business interest in space in the harbor. There are some opportunities on the horizon there.
Mr. Mayor?
Councilman Bailey.
Well, your comments are valid, but the other side of that coin is the city's costs are all going up with that, with inflation. Labor is going up, all of their fuel, all of their equipment. So it's kind of it's a wash there. But let's talk about all those projects coming to town. I think Mr. Meyer was in here a couple of years back, and he had a crew there all summer long, and they paid what? A $4,000 to $3,000 cap, and they rented rooms all summer without anything. This is where I'm talking about. We need to have a serious discussion about where we're capturing revenue. We're going to have these work crews coming in doing this work, and they get off scot-free. And we need to look at those things. We need to close those loopholes. And, you know, that's what I'm talking about. Where's the money coming from? We don't have these serious discussions and come up with answers. We just kind of kick the can down the road.
Absolutely.
That's all.
Yeah. Thank you, Councilman Baylor, because we've had some of those lodge owners and stuff come in the past and make that very point. So.
One more point is, I got lodging last night on $120 plus $30 in taxes. And what do? You pay it. You know, so we need to be capturing that.
$120. Where were you staying, man?
Not an acreage.
I just looked at the charter, it is 2 years. Council can enact an ordinance undoing an initiated ordinance 2 years later. So that was not a referred ordinance, they did it after the referral period of 30 days, so they actually did it as an initiated ordinance to repeal that ordinance that council had put in.
Councilman Schaefer.
Yeah, a lot of my thoughts were covered by other people. I think you did a really good job putting this together and capturing all of our thoughts from the various work sessions that we've done. Yeah, and some of my concerns were, the additions, if they're sustainable or not because of these kind of one-time short-term funds. But one comment sort of to add to what Councilman Sherman had said about rebuilding, some city to provide services. Well, some of the things are like a liability, with the pool, with the recreation center, with the public works in our streets, like those things could be potential liabilities for the city, and it's going to cost us eventually, or probably cost us more if we don't pay for things now. So I do have concerns about increasing, the budget beyond what we can pay for it long term, but there also are some things that we need to do to keep our house together. So, I'm supportive of the increased the public works or streets position, the parks and rec. Those additional positions that are gonna kind of cover our bases.
Other questions, comments, Councilman?
I would say,
Yeah,
I don't
Mr.
know
Mayor,
about the rest
Allison.
of them, but we definitely need a human resources person. You know, 30 odd.
I hear you, Councilman Allison. Okay, so Councilman Allison.
Yeah, just, to wrap up my thoughts completely on the budget, I'm with Councilmember Baylor. A lot of the comments that Councilmember Guard had are all my concerns as well. My concern with the budget in general, and I may be, channeling through Councilmember Baylor here, is that we are taking $300,000 from the earnings of the permanent fund, and I guess I don't approve of taking earnings or anything from the permanent fund to pay for general fund things. But in my mind, I consider that $300,000 perhaps as paying part of the bond debt that the state reneged on, coming up with that and using it that. But, you know, it's this pocket, that pocket, it's, you know, it's the same pair of pants that we're getting this money from. So, you know, however you want to look at it, I can go with that. It's nice to have a budget that everybody's getting what they wanted, as far as, you know, the asks on the budget, and it's nice to be able to do that. But as has been pointed out, you know, $300,000 from the earnings is not sustainable at this point in time. You know, we're going to have a year where we lose $500,000 on that just in earnings. So it's not sustainable. We've got $500,000 in ARPA funds that isn't always going to be there. You know, COVID's going to be with us for a long time, but the money train is not. I guess my biggest concern is that when we talk about increasing the budget, we're always, the focus seems to be on revenues. We need revenues. We need to we'll figure out the revenues in the next couple of years to replace those revenues. And we're never talking about what's an appropriate expense, which I think Councilmember Gard alluded to. We need to have that. You know, all in all, I can support this budget, but those going forward need to know that, you know, at some point in time that it's going to hit the wall, and we're not going to be able to sustain it. And, you know, it is to talk about, you know, we're not filling new positions. Well, you know, a lot of these positions were created during the gravy train years of when we first started getting forest receipts and had extra money from that filling in that school budget thing. So things got a little carried away, I think, at the city, and, you know, and $12.5 million budget I don't think is sustainable in our community. Although the next few years, you know, you're going to have ARPA for a couple of years. You're going to have a big harbor project that administrative funds are going to be able to be taken off of. You know, we've got a lot of things maybe for the next few years, but at some point in time we need to have that discussion of what's appropriate and how we are going to fund those things. So, you know, nothing that hasn't been said already tonight, but it's you know, you're gonna hit the wall at some point in time, and it's gonna be a lot harder to do if we're not planning for it now. So anyway, that's my thoughts.
Hey, Manager Howard?
So what would be helpful for me, again, when I put this budget together, I used the information that we discussed at the last few budget meetings and plugged them in here. And by no means do I expect that this is my budget and that this is the budget we have to use. I present this to you as a place for discussion. So if there's general consensus that we're uncomfortable spending the permanent fund earnings and plugging that into the budget, we can adjust that number or eliminate that number, and that will then force a conversation or a reconsideration of some of the expense sides, which is totally reasonable. So I just want to be clear that I will not feel in the least bit offended if anybody wants to make adjustments to this document. I would totally entertain whatever that is. This is the moment, this is the time, and if there's general discomfort around utilizing any of the revenues that are in the budget or any of the expenses that are in the budget, this is when we should address them.
Councilman Gleason?
So is that $500,000 number that the hospital asked for, is that a hard number they showed you? Like,
Now, it is not a hard number.
make it $200,000.
They used 300 last year, as I said, to replace the fuel tanks that were buried and leaking. I believe the resources they've asked for this time are to replace, I can't remember what. I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank, but Dr. Sanders could fill in. But they have a specific project in mind, but it's not for operations. So I'm a little uncomfortable. If we only want to give so much money to the hospital, that's one thing. But if we want to help them with an asset and want to allocate resources in that way, that's a different conversation. And I don't have the information you asked.
For me, they charge for their services, so I don't have a problem telling them we don't have the money to give to you, you know. I have a problem telling the school we don't have money for you because they don't charge for their services. They require, they get money from the state and the city, you know. So I can separate it out that way, in my mind. So I have no problem lowering that number, and I mean, if we can't afford to pay for the hospital to do a project, then we can't afford, you know, we can't afford it. Is it gonna hamper their service somehow to not have this project done?
It's my understanding it's a life safety health code violation that they're trying to correct.
I would like to see exactly what they're talking about.
Sure.
Yeah, she's gonna be at the meeting later tonight, and Dr. Sanders will ask that question.
I think we discussed this once before. I think this is removal of the generators out of the building, and it is a life safety code thing, but the building itself is an asset of the city's. We need to keep it in good repair. This is like back to the deferred maintenance issue. And we can't expect our equipment to work well if we keep deferring maintenance on it. So if it's something we need to do that's a life safety, at the hospital, it's not good, I think. Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, Councilman Guard, you faded out there. Did we lose you, or are we done there?
No, I was done.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Councilman Baylor.
Yeah, I guess just a quick reminder on the hospital. They've actually done an outstanding job bringing monies in. It wasn't that long ago we were budgeting $1 million a year just to keep the doors open with no maintenance. So my hats go off to Dr. Sanders, their staff, everybody involved down at the hospital. I think they do an outstanding job. And I don't know what the money is being used for, but if it's health safety issues, then I think we have to do that. But I would like to congratulate them on the job that they are doing. $1 million a year is what it was costing us, you know, previous years. You know, you look at the school, I'm not a big fan of the community supplying daycare or preschool, whatever you want to call it. That's a couple $100,000 a year. I think we're paying for 13 years of schooling is enough. So, you know, there's some costs that we could take a look at. People have different opinions of it, but that's my opinion on that one. I don't know where else, but that's all I got for now.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, this is Allison.
Councilman Allison.
Yeah, I guess when I think about the hospital, and well, what are we working on right now? We're working on our operating budget, and if it's for capital items, then it doesn't belong in the operating budget, in my opinion. I think if the hospital needs money to do a life safety thing that, you know, OSHA is requiring us to do, and we have to do it, and there's no other money anywhere to get for that, which, you know, in today's times, anything that's life safety is likely that there is other money out there to get. But I don't think that we should be budgeting in our operating budget money that they want just for capital items. That belongs in a different budget. I would put zero.
Councilman Allison.
I think Helen hung up on him.
The call dropped. there, so, okay. So, yeah, that's interesting because it's a capital expense for the hospital, but it comes as a kind of an annual operating expense for the city when it goes out, right?
Yeah, I'm not
So-
aware that we have a separate capital budget per se that I mean, we do have a separate capital budget, but for departments, and we've never, my understanding is they've used their allocation in the past for whatever they choose, similar to the school. They use it for whatever they need for their budget. So they put this in their operating budget or their annual budget and are presenting it to us as an ask. So I don't know that we have ever used another mechanism, but it's certainly not outside the realm of possibility.
Okay, we'll wait and see if we can get them back, but, I think we got the gist of where it
Well, when
is.
it comes right down to it, does it really matter what column we're putting? I think his comment earlier was it's all coming out of the same pair of pants.
Yeah,
So if
okay, I think we may
we
have
have a finite amount of dollars we have, and
Okay. I
don't
think
know
we
that it
may
makes
have
that much
Councilman Allison
where
back
we're
now.
putting it.
Are you back, Councilman
Mr.
Allison?
Mayor, this is Allison. I made it back.
Okay, great. You were saying, zero it out.
Yeah, just the bottom line is if it's a capital item, it belongs in a capital budget. It doesn't. If they don't need $500,000 for an operating budget, and I kudos just as Councilman Baylor said, kudos to doing the job that they're doing and not needing operating money from us. And I'm not saying that they shouldn't come to us if they need money for a capital item as well, but that doesn't belong in the operating budget. And just because we've got the revenues, as we're discussing these revenues here, doesn't mean we have to spend every nickel of the revenues on something. Some of that spending can be a transfer into a fund for something else, or we don't have to spend every nickel. Just because we cut $500,000 from the hospital doesn't give me $500,000 to add to some other fund over here. But I would be willing to take that $500,000 off the table for the hospital, and with the understanding that the capital items are coming later, as I've been told they are coming for the city as well. So anyway.
Manager Howard?
Can I get a general consensus? Because I was hearing some discomfort around the draw from the permanent fund. Is that something you guys want me to remove from revenue?
Councilman Sherman?
So I have a suggestion for the group. I'm sitting here looking straight in the eyes of Manager Howard, and she just made it very clear that this budget belongs to all of us. And a lot of us are really uncomfortable with the $300,000 coming out of, I know it's not the corpus, but it's like taking it out of your savings, and then you gotta replace that savings, just like you do at home. And I'm not happy about the extra $200,000 that's gone into the CCMC line item for a capital project. I agree completely with Councilman Allison. Capital projects need to be on a different location, not in our operating budget. So I was gonna suggest, I'll throw it out there as a suggestion, that we challenge Manager Howarth to make that $300,000 from the permanent fund disappear in the next version of the budget, and leave it to her skills to decide how that happens. But then the second part of my proposal, so that we don't put this all on her shoulders, is that come first quarter, hopefully in January, we can put this on pending agenda. We have a long-term financial planning session with the manager while we still have all our council members with history on service, and work to do some long-term planning, whether it's with the public or without. We discuss gas tax, we discuss mill rate, we discuss everything that cuts to the budget, potential revenues, taxes, whatever. But we do what Councilman Guard suggests, we have the discussion of revenue and expenses at the same time. And we participate so that we can give good direction to our manager.
So two pieces, council. Take the 300,000 out of revenues from the permanent fund earnings and ask Manager Howarth to bring the budget back with that missing. Second piece, long-term planning after the first of the year. Is there any objection or support for that?
I kind of got the idea from Jeff that he wanted to do that before we approved this budget with as far as the employees, the new employees, or the potential new employees or something, I don't know.
So, Councilman Gleason saying it sounded like, well, I guess that's,
Jeff, you could ask Jeff.
yeah, that's what's in front of you though. Councilman Sherman suggested. So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, this is Councilmember Meyer.
Councilman Meyer.
I do like the idea of getting another budget back to us that doesn't have the 300,000 in there. As far as CCMC goes, I am hesitant to take them out completely. Whether the money that we are giving them is going into their capital projects or their operating, I would like to see that before making a full-on decision on what there is. But I do think that we should be contributing a little bit, because I think we have gotten ourselves in a hole in the past where we budget the hospital X amount, but like Councilmember Baylor said, it ends up really costing us about $1 million a year. And the hospital has been doing a really good job on their finances and has gotten that really straightened out. And I just don't want to see us get straightened out and then go back into a hole and again. So I would like more information on the hospital. I'd like to see their budget and kind of work through that. But I think it would be good to see a draft budget without the 300,000, and that may just come from the hospital line item, and then we get more detail on it and have discussion and talk from there. Those are my thoughts. Thanks.
Okay, Manager Howard, did you want some feedback from council on the expense side, on places to look for that?
I would be glad to hear what your priorities are, and I'll integrate them. I have some ideas as well. I don't think there's a huge challenge in filling a $300,000 hole when it gets to 500,000 or more, depending if you have other revenue areas that you want to be revisited. How big that hole is and on the revenue side will determine what kinds of cuts we need to make on the expense side.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, it's Baylor.
Councilman Baylor, then Schaefer.
So while I agree with the 300,000, there is a number that we can safely pull out of earnings, but that discussion needs to be had with, forgive me, who's that broker? UBS. That discussion, the manager can have that discussion. You know, I don't think 3.5% is the right number to be pulling out, which is 300,000 out of 9 mil. There is a number, and I would feel comfortable using that, given the advice from the broker, saying, look, this is a little pocket of money here. You can safely draw. You're not going to run your funds down. So that's one place you can look, but 300,000 I know is not the number.
Councilman Schaefer?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, if we don't have to call from our dividend earnings, then I guess that would be preferable. But if there is, if you are able to talk to them and they give you an amount, that's also, I guess, fine. And then in terms of Councilman Sherman's other suggestion, I mean, I think we'd be running out of, if we're gonna have a big discussion about revenues and expenses and long-term planning and really get our brains around it, I don't think we have time to do that. And then also adjust the budget to
Yeah.
meet that discussion. So at this point, we don't have time for this budget. So I think that conversation does need to happen after, first of the year, when we still have all the council members who've had skin in the game for a while, a lot of insight. So I think that seemed like a really good idea.
Okay, yeah, we're several iterations into the, into this, workshops and whatnot on this year's budget. And, Helen, can you remind us what the earnings of the permanent fund were this year, round numbers, rough numbers?
By third quarter, we were around 600 and something. But it adjusts and fluctuates, so we haven't realized the actuals for this year. What was recommended is we take what the code says is the previous year's earnings are allowed to be used. So that would be 2020 earnings, not using this year's earnings. This year's earnings would pump to next year. That's what code says we can use.
Okay.
But in terms of what Baylor was asking about, if we used a permanent fund model, you average over 5 years and come up with a number and take a percentage of that, and rather than just doing on an annual basis. And that will be the recommendation that will come back at the January meeting if we get together, is we'll have something along those lines ready for you guys to consume and participate and figure out. So.
Okay, so we're up at the top of the hour. I think what I've heard is a consensus to take the $300,000 permanent fund earnings out, let Helen bring back a budget from that, and to plan a deeper discussion after the first of the year while we still have a lot of institutional memory on council.
And did I also hear that we're going to move the CCMC monies, if it's all capital, move that into a capital line out of the operating budget? Was that a consensus?
I heard two, council.
Yeah, this is Allison.
Okay. Yeah, Councilman
Yeah.
Allison.
I wasn't saying move it from one budget to another. I'm just saying that for consideration into that, yes, but I'm not going to approve a capital budget at this point in time. I would say get it out of the hospital's operating budget, and we're focused on the operating budget right here. So that was my thought with it. I wasn't saying put it in another category tonight. I'm not going to approve that.
Okay.
And this is Councilman Bailey, and I'd like to hear from Dr. Sanders too, what the thought process is on that money.
Yeah, exactly. And there's some concurrence here as well. So, okay.
Do we want to recess and reconvene this work session at the end, after the regular?
Yeah, council, we're up at 7 o'clock. Do you want to recess and reconvene after the regular meeting?
I think that would be wise to give us that option.
Okay, is there any objection?
No, I have one more thought process to go down, so I'd prefer to do that. Yep.
Okay, great. So I can entertain a motion to adjourn the work
You
session.
just did it with no objection.
Okay, no objection, so we're adjourned.
A recess.
Sorry,
Adjourn or
we are-
recess?
We are recessed.
I knew what you meant. Logan, you want to set that up for the road?
Okay, we're just getting set up here.